Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Brimelow. I'm the editor of VDare.com, and I'm coming to you from the conference room in Berkeley Springs Castle in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. We, I guess many of you know, we bought this castle because due to the reign of terror, we were unable to hold conferences in commercial hotels and things. We had somewhere between 10 and 15 cancel on us in the 3 years after Trump's election. This idea that Trump made it possible for people to say things that they weren't saying before is exactly the reverse of the truth. In fact, the regime went into overdrive to try to suppress dissent, and above all on the issue of immigration, which really terrified them to death. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by Dr. John Lott, who is a notorious thought criminal and a hero of mine, a personal hero of mine. I first met him I think nearly 30 years ago when he was at Yale, and I drove down to try to persuade him to become a columnist at Forbes in the days when Forbes actually existed and had a lot of money. And then I subsequently wrote an article about him, which we'll have to find, when he was at the University of Maryland. John is famous for his work on guns and crime, and which I think is summarized by his book, More Guns, Less Crime. Is that right, John?
Yeah, no, that was my first one. Yeah, actually, you came down. I was at Wharton, I believe, at the time when you came down, but it could be.
Yeah, no, you're right. I see you still have a Pennsylvania cell phone number.
I do. So.
Well, John is going to be speaking for us at our conference, April 26th to 28th. The conference is sold out, I'm very happy to say, in spite of the extraordinary price that Liddy charged for it. But we are still selling live stream tickets, and you can get them by going to vdas.com/donate. And I think that we're going to put up on the screen how to do that. We have a very gratifying response right now. We sold more live stream tickets than we have in-person tickets. These are boutique conferences. We can get about 80 to 100 people in here. So, and we hope to expand that. Now, John, we're very grateful to you for coming. Can you tell us where you are? Well, your background is even more spectacular than mine.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have a lot to live up to catch up to you, I think. But in any case, I'm an economist. I have a PhD in economics from UCLA. I've been an academic much of my life. I've had positions at Wharton, as we mentioned, at Yale, as you mentioned, University of Chicago, Stanford, UCLA, Rice. I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington, and then more recently, I was senior advisor for research and statistics in the Department of Justice, first at the Office of Justice Programs and then at the Office of Legal Policy. But, you know, it gives you a rough idea of what I've done.
Now, another thing we have in common, John, is that I guess we both declared independence from our institutionalized profession, or in my case, a trade. Journalism is not a profession. I mean, I've been running the VDare Foundation, which publishes VDare.com for 20 years, and you have your own foundation, don't you?
Yeah, my own nonprofit, the Crime Prevention Research Center. I mean, I was kind of driven out of academia. You know, for a while, I published a large amount of research. There was a study that came out in right after 2000 that looked at academic economists who had published peer-reviewed research between 1969 and 2000. I didn't start publishing until 1986, but I was ranked 4th in the world in terms of number of pages published in peer-reviewed academic econ journals. And that provided me a fair amount of protection over time, or at least some, but it wasn't enough to completely protect me. So you know, I could go through the stories, but
so you've declared independence now. Where's your foundation based?
Well, I mean, we're basically all over the place. We don't have an office per se, just to save money. Right. But Our research director is Carl Moody. He's an economics professor at William and Mary. But we have our academic advisory board has people from Harvard, University of Chicago, the Wharton Business School, University of Michigan, Emory. So we cover basically any topics on crime, everything from policing to vote fraud issues to gun control type issues. And so, we have expertise in different areas and basically know where the data is and try to set things right on these things.
We ran VDARE.com virtually for many, many years. The only reason we actually now have this headquarters is just because we can't have conferences. So we've been forced into the historic property business. And in fact, we're having a volunteer weekend. It's a separate foundation, the VDARE, the Berkeley Springs Castle Foundation. It's having a volunteer day tomorrow, and people will come in and clean up and remove dead trees. And the castle is very popular in its local community. I'm happy to say. When I got into journalism in the early 1970s. It was left-wing, but I was able to survive by being a financial journalist. They all realized that they didn't like writing about finance, but they all knew they had to have it. Somebody had to do it. And so I was able to survive in the briar patch of financial journalism like Brer Rabbit. But I don't think that I could do that now. In fact, I was ultimately fired by MarketWatch, which is my last, I did a column there for more than 10 years, partly because of pressure from other people on the staff. It wasn't that I was writing about anything other than highly technical investment issues on MarketWatch. It's just that they knew I wrote on immigration, and they would periodically, deputations would go to the editor to ask him to get rid of me. So I don't think that young journalists can survive in this milieu right now. And of course, what it means is they have to develop their own Substack and podcast audience, and we can see that they're trying to do that. That those are efflorescence of distant sites and so on, which of course the regime is trying to stamp out as fast as it can, just like it stamped out our Facebook and YouTube pages. But what would you say about academia? I mean, as you know, I have three daughters, John, and the eldest now is three daughters with Lydia. The eldest now 13. So I guess she has about 5 years before she has to start thinking about or going to college. And I just hope the whole damn system collapses in 5 years, the tertiary education system. It seems to me it's terminally corrupt, total waste of money, and financial rape of the parents and indoctrination of and perversion of the children. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's pretty accurate, yeah. Look, at one time you'd like to believe Ivy League schools, for example, were kind of guaranteeing that people were smart, and that there was some value added there. It'd be challenged in school. But you look at who gets admitted now to schools, a lot of the top universities have stopped using standardized tests. So there's a lot more randomness there. Even large university systems like the University of California and University of Texas no longer use standardized tests. And they do that in order to have more flexibility on who they can admit on criteria that has nothing to do with how smart people are. You look at the grading in schools. Yale, 80% of the grades that are giving out are A's. I think it's like 76% or something at Harvard. And what that means is that and the reason why they do that is because they don't want to fail the affirmative action people that they let in who are lower quality. And but what that means is that students don't need to study very much. I've seen some surveys that indicate that Ivy League students are spending about less than half the amount of time now that they spent in 1960 for studying. Because, if you're basically guaranteed an A with minimal work, why bother studying? The lowest grade you can get is a B. And so, why study? And also because of the lower quality students in the class, the professors have watered down what they teach. And so, even at the top, so-called top schools, there you have a lot more randomness in terms of who gets in, and there's a lot less value added when they're in the school there. And so, I mean, I guess I've thought for a while you should just skip, if businesses want to hire bright people, they should go and use standardized tests to go and figure out who the bright people are.
I mean, the problem is, though, John, that they can't, can they? I mean, that's what Griggs Power is all about. You're not allowed to use standardized tests because...
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying that's what I would do. I understand that there are restrictions on them doing that, but I'm just saying that would be that maybe they can use some other proxy to accomplish the same thing. You'd have to have a lawyer talk to you about that. But look, I have had a couple kids I've had 3 kids that have gone to Ivy League schools. And all I can tell you is it was a mistake to send them there in all cases. I told the kids, if you work really hard and you get into a top school, I'll find a way to go and pay for it. But one son went to Dartmouth. He had like a monthly column in the school newspaper there. And he was just mercilessly attacked. The school newspaper, the editorial board had to write editorials twice defending running his pieces. And one time they described him as the most hated man on campus. He couldn't be invited to parties that were there. If a girl would go out on dates with him, the girl would be harassed until she would stop going out on dates with him. It's just a mess. He went in as a bright, happy kid. He basically came out as a very sad kid when he finally came out. And then 2 other children of mine have gone to Penn. And, so my daughter, for example, she voted for Biden in 2020. And the reason why she was telling me was because all of her friends were voting for Biden. And I said, well, you don't need to tell them. And she said, well, they'll ask. And she can't lie to people, which I think is good. But she was saying, that they wouldn't talk to her anymore. And, when I was on admissions at Wharton, which is part of Penn, for a while in the 1990s. And one of the things that I came across, so I was on admissions for 2 years. I did graduate admissions, but I still had some interaction with the undergraduates. I remember one time, for example, I'm in this meeting and I hear 2 staff people talking about an Eagle Scout and how, they could not admit an Eagle Scout. And I said, did I hear you right, that you weren't going to admit the student because he was an Eagle Scout? And they said, yeah. I said, what's the deal there? And said, John, you have to understand, we're a liberal arts university. It's important that students be open-minded. And we've just discovered over time that Eagle Scouts are not open-minded. And so we can't, it just doesn't make any sense to admit somebody like that. And I said, don't you know that Eagles, only 1% of Scouts get to be Eagle Scouts? Doesn't that show the drive and perseverance that you're talking about all the time? And say, yeah, it does. But, it's extremely important that they be open-minded. I basically just took that as a meaning that they thought that the kid was likely to have the wrong political views on it. And I've seen that in other times. So also when I was there, they could never get more than 1.5% of the student body being gay. But the staff was convinced that 10% of the population at the time was gay. And so they would give a very hard affirmative action preference for anybody who would indicate in their personal essays or whatever that they were gay. They'd literally add a few hundred points to their SAT scores to help them get in. And again, my view in talking to them is if all of a sudden gays became very conservative as opposed to being relatively liberal, they would have stopped doing it. Then they would have treated them like they treat an Eagle Scout. They just look for proxies for political views. So it's not too surprising that you're going to see that 75, 80% of the students that are entering in to Ivy League schools like Penn or others will classify themselves as liberals going in. You may have 6 or 8% classify themselves as conservatives. And of course, all the professors, or virtually all their professors, will be liberals. And I think the idea is essentially they do it for two reasons. One is they want to try to go and put the thumb on the scale to help out people who have the right political views. But then also the notion is that if you only let in a few conservatives that are bright and all their friends are liberals and all their professors are left-wing, then even those few conservatives that they let in will end up becoming more liberal over time.
It's peer group pressure. Yeah. Peer group pressure. And the other downside of what's going on, of course, is that I think it's affecting research, isn't it?
I mean, it's affected research. Look, when I was when I first got into academia back in the mid '80s, it was about 60%, and for economics, which has long been considered probably the most conservative by far of the social sciences. But it was about 60% Democrats, 40% Republicans. I guess about 15 years ago, there was another survey that was done that showed it was about 12-1 Democrats to Republicans at that time. And, the thing is, even that type of thing understates the imbalance. So I was in law schools. I taught in law schools. And there, I remember there was a survey also about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, that showed that there was 93% of the professors in the top 100 law schools were registered as Democrats, 4% were registered as Republicans. But what you have to understand, you have to get a supermajority vote in order to get tenure. So you can be such a sufficiently wacky left-winger that you are too wacky for even a third of the Democrats, but you'll still get tenure. But if you're a Republican, you have to get 2/3 of the Democrats to vote for you. And the thing is, I think tenure, they say tenure protects you from making risky positions. And I think that's actually wrong. What happens is that they know that if they give you tenure, they're stuck with you for life. And so they look for very subtle signals to see what your views might be. And so the only types of Republican types who get tenure, let's say in a law school, are people who are pretty liberal Republicans or completely non-political. But even then, the only types of classes that they teach would be something like tax, which the other people don't care about. You're not going to see somebody who's even neutral teaching constitutional law or something like that, and because those are too important in the view of the different law professors that are there.
You have to ask yourself, well, let me back up a second and say, after the Bell Curve was published in 95, it was 94, wasn't it? I attended a private meeting with Charles Murray, and he was very optimistic because he said his data all kinds of people in academia were asking for his data, and there's all kinds of research into IQ going on, and he was very cheerful about it. Dan Seligman, who was a Fortune columnist who I knew very well and used to write about IQ, was exactly the opposite. He said that the impact of the bell curve has been disastrous because people are frightened to write about it. Well, now that this fear has penetrated back into academia, and as far as I can see, IQ research is grinding to a halt. Murray is now very pessimistic. He thinks the whole world is finished. The world's gone to hell and nothing can be done about it. Right. So in other words, woke is is even getting into the hard sciences. Of course, you see it in medical schools.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, no, look. When I first got into academia, what you would find is there are two groups of obviously most professors were liberal, but you had two groups. You had those that kind of came of age and became academics before the Vietnam War, and those who came of age afterwards. The ones who were beforehand, you would disagree with them, but they got into academia because they basically enjoyed the discussion. They enjoyed the process of arguing with you, and they just liked discussing things. The types of professors that got in afterwards were much more just wanting to have people like themselves, and really disliked anybody who disagreed with them. And the thing is, that's overwhelmingly, I mean, even in economics, law has long been that way. I've been in public policy school too. You know, it's very difficult to operate there. And you look at the quality of research. Often, I think a lot of the research now, I mean, I've published over 100 peer review articles, but I think, and many of them are very controversial type pieces. I mean, on gun control, I've written on giving women the right to vote. I've written on affirmative action in policing. I've written on, you know, I could go on for a long time.
Could you do this in an academic environment? Or do you have to?
Not today. Not
Right.
today. I
That's
wouldn't
why-
even know where to send it. I'll give you an example. I wrote a paper while I was at the Department of Justice on vote fraud in the 2020 election. And I sent it to Public Choice to begin with. Went through the refereeing process. Eventually, it was accepted. And then a couple left-wing professors, one at Stanford, one at University of Chicago, found out that it was forthcoming. And so they basically, and the guy at Stanford has been an expert in Democrat legal cases for ballot access and other things, basically threatened the journal, saying that, you know, nobody would submit to it anymore. And the journal withdrew the paper. And then I sent it out to like 5 other journals, and they wouldn't even send it out to referees. Yeah, I would get into arguments with people about that, and they would say things like, well, you know, this is a political piece. And I'd say, you know, and I'd say, well, is the test wrong? You know, tell me what's wrong with the paper. But so who knows? But you know,
Well, the other thing about this system is that the tertiary education system is fantastically expensive, partly because it's a third-party payment problem. I mean, the student
Right,
loans
sure.
have inflated the bureaucrats have been able to charge more tuition fees and so on because the students are getting loans. My question is, how long can this go on for?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think, look, it probably can go on for a while. A lot of these elite institutions have huge endowments. I mean, they have big costs too, but they have huge endowments. And, you know, if I had a kid that was going to go to college right now, I'd probably tell him to go to a state school. But here's the problem that you have. And that is, so in economics, for example, in the top 100 econ departments, you may have 50 positions opening up in any given year. Those schools can hire everybody they want from the top maybe 3 econ departments. And so you don't have very much diversity of thought that's going on. You know, back in the 70s and 80s even, you were having big increases in hiring that was occurring because you had a big increase in the number of students. And so you could get somebody from a 25th ranked school that could distinguish themselves. They could get a teaching position that had research opportunities and then kind of work their way up to a top university. You don't see that diversity anymore. And so I don't know, I'm very pessimistic. I think you almost have to, you basically have to remove everybody who's there. I don't know what else you do at this point because they're not, you know, they're not going to go and hire people who disagree with them. And they're surely
On the other
not.
hand, the quality of their research is going to decline because, for one
Oh,
thing,
yeah,
they're
sure.
not
Well, I
facing
mean,
new arguments. They're not
everybody's
facing
in
new
a bubble.
arguments.
Right. Well, look, when I taught, and I miss teaching, but when I taught, I had to make sure, I mean, I would have done this anyway, but I had to have the strongest arguments on both sides there because I know that, you know, I'm one professor and they're going to be having lots of other classes from people who are going to disagree with me. And so I need to go and provide the strongest arguments on both sides and kind of critically analyze them. The thing is, most other professors don't do that, and they don't have to. And the thing is, the students don't even understand the bias. The students don't understand what questions can be asked. They don't understand. You're lucky to get the students to read the material assigned for the class, let alone going and trying to figure out what might be the strongest arguments outside of that. A left-wing professor can have a straw man on the other side. And the students in the class, they see what they think is, a silly or a weak argument from on the other side, and that's what they think the conservative position is. They think that that's the best argument that can be provided, and so that's one of the ways that professors kind of indoctrinate their students. And the students don't know even what types of questions to ask. I mean, for most undergraduates, they're very uncritical thinkers. They just go and kind of try to memorize and learn what they have to learn for the class that they're having there. And it makes, so I don't know.
I have a writer who's actually quite well known. He does a podcast called The Jolly Heretic, Ed Dutton, and he's written several pieces for me saying that what's happening now is similar to what happened in Britain in the 17th and 18th century, which was that the major universities just became completely arteriosclerotic, I guess, that they were only focused on theology and so on, and there were finishing clubs finishing schools for the upper class. And what happened was real research, particularly in the sciences, migrated out of the Oxford and Cambridge into the what were then called dissenting academies, set up by nonconformists who couldn't go to Oxford and Cambridge anyway. There was a great burgeoning of these things right through the 18th century and into the early 19th century, when there were a lot of university reforms and the universities pulled themselves together in Britain. Do you think that's going to happen here, that there's just going to be a complete disintermediation of the academic hierarchy, and we're going to see things like your own organization, for example, or AI? You were with AI at one point, weren't you? That's where real research is going to go.
I don't know. AI, the guy who's running AI now was chief of staff for Bloomberg for a while. They've kind of gone to the dark side in many different ways that are there. When I was at AEI, there were good people there, but I'll just give you an example. I would work on paper I wrote on the impact of giving women the right to vote on the size of government. I worked on that for 10 years.
I remember. Can you just tell everyone what your devastating conclusions were?
Right. Well, basically, there's been a puzzle in political science and public choice and other areas about why governments around the world started to grow when they did. And there's, in the United States, the federal government was about 2 to 3% of GDP from the beginning of the country all the way up to the 1920s. You'd have a war, it would go up, and then it would go down afterwards. World War I was the first war that it didn't go quite all the way down, and then it started to grow during the 1920s. So the question is, what was this 50-year period of time? Some countries would start growing in the 1880s and so on. And what I noticed was it seemed to be associated with when women were given the right to vote in different countries. Now, one nice thing about the U.S. data is that some states voluntarily gave women the right to vote, and others were forced to give women the right to vote as a result of the constitutional amendment that was there. And the reason why that's nice is because you have this question of causality. Is it something kind of in the general political environment that both wants to give women the right to vote and supports a larger government at the same time? Or is it the fact that you're giving women the right to vote, which is causing government to grow? And what you found was that when states gave women the right to vote, within about 10 years, you saw about a doubling of the size of government spending and revenue. But you saw essentially the same growth whether states voluntarily gave women the right to vote or they were forced to do so. The other thing that was interesting is that when you gave women the right to vote, not all women voted right away. Basically, younger women voted, older women didn't vote very much. And the turnout rate for women, basically it took about 45 years before the turnout rate for women was about the same as it was for men. Basically, as the older women died out and younger women got older and replaced them. And you could continue seeing the increased growth in government as the percentage of voters who are women continued to increase over time. And you saw basically welfare and education and health type things. You saw more progressive income taxes coming in as the percentage of women who could vote increased over time. So.
And you say it took you 10 years to get this thing published?
Well, it took about 10 years to get the data together because we had to get data on state government revenue and expenditures going back to 1870.
Did it occur to you that this wouldn't be a very popular paper?
Well, my wife at the time threatened never to talk to me again if I worked on it. And but I have to tell you, it just shows how hard it is to go and predict what the reaction to different papers are going to be. That's probably the one paper that both Ann Coulter and Catherine McKinnon agree on. Catherine McKinnon is a well-known left-wing feminist legal scholar.
Right.
She had the office next door to me at the University of Chicago Law School. And it was, and she liked it because it showed that women's preferences weren't being properly, in her view, represented before women were given the right to vote. And Anne liked it because, she didn't like government growing, and it kind of fit her views on how women voted. So
yeah, she's famous, of course, for saying that the 19th Amendment ought to be repealed. I mean, she said to me that she thinks only about 70% of women don't pay any attention to politics at all, and their vote shouldn't be counted. But talking of Anne, there is another. Her book Adios America, I thought its chapters on immigration crime were very interesting for a number of reasons. But one of them was how absolutely awful and appalling the data is on this. She says somewhere that the U.S. government can tell you how many Hawaiians own transistor radios, but it can't tell you immigrant crime rates. They just don't want to know. Right.
Well, I mean, that gets into, maybe we talked about this before the talk now, but, it's, you'd think this would be easy data. It is easy data for them to get a hold of, but they don't want to look at it. I'm going to have to get going in a minute. I think we've been talking a little bit longer.
Yes, absolutely, John. Can you tell us what your Wall Street Journal piece is about?
Which journal piece?
Are you having a Wall Street?
Oh, yeah. Well, you're right. The Wall Street Journal piece. It's basically on crime. It's a lot of media has been going out there saying that crime is falling, but surveys seem to show that people think that crime is increasing and how mistaken people are. And the piece basically argues that it's the media that doesn't understand the crime data. There's two types of crime data out there. There's the FBI Uniform Crime Reports, and those deal with crimes reported to police. And then there's the National Crime Victimization Survey, which surveys about 240,000 people each year. And they try to get at a measure of both reported and the non-reported crime. And what's happened is that reported crime has fallen, but total crime has gone up. And there are multiple reasons for that. But the one that I primarily focus on in the piece is that law enforcement's disintegrated. You look at the cities with more than 1 million people in it, for example. In the 5 years before COVID, they had an arrest rate for violent crimes of 44%. So 44% of violent crimes resulted in arrest. It fell during COVID, and by 2022, it was down to 20%. So the arrest rate for violent crimes, unbelievably, fell from 44% to 20%. And what you find is that when people don't think anything's going to happen to the criminals, that they're not going to get arrested or convicted, people simply don't go and bother reporting to crimes to the police as much as they did previously. And that's basically what's happened. So I'll give you an example. If you look at, for cities over 1 million, if you look at total crimes, okay, reported and non-reported, only about 8% in 2022 resulted in arrest. And for property crimes, both reported and non-reported together, only about 1% of property crimes resulted in arrest. And of course, just because something resulted in arrest doesn't mean that the person is charged. You know, there's only a portion of those who are arrested, particularly for property crimes, which gets charged. And, you know, and not even all those who are charged end up being prosecuted and end up being convicted. And so, you know, if you are in a large city, you know, the risks for you stealing are like tiny. You know, it's like virtually no risk at all for stealing. And it's very low for committing violent crime, too.
This is why you're living in Montana now.
Okay, well,
is that right?
Who knows?
So tell us, John, you're going to be speaking for us. Are you going to speak on immigration and crime in spite of the awful data?
I mean, I can talk about the awful data too, if you want me to.
Sure, it's a big problem. Well, thank you so much for giving us so much time tonight. As I said earlier, you can watch John. The conference is sold out, but you can watch John on the live stream, and the details are on the screen. John, thanks very much. We really look forward to seeing you.
No, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye now.